Welcome to Mojo Grip. Mike here. Today we're comparing two of my favorite light sport aircraft, the Bristell and the Sportcruiser. These are two airplanes that we've covered in detail on this channel, and so I thought it was worth comparing the numbers since they share a lot of the same components. And we'll use the usual metrics: your mission, design, performance, safety, and the price. So let's take the mission first. Both the Sportcruiser and the Bristell are light sport airplanes, so generally speaking they serve the same mission. Now, many people think of the light sport airplane as an airplane that you can only take on short trips, but either of these airplanes can travel north of 500 miles. In the Sportcruiser you have a range of up to 600 miles, and in the Bristell you have a range of up to 800 miles. But one mission that sets these two airplanes apart is training. If you travel around the country, chances are you'll find a lot of flight schools who use the Sportcruiser as their primary trainer. Now, unlike a Bristell, a lot of Bristell owners buy these airplanes to use them for personal use or just for joy flying, whereas the Sportcruiser is actually geared towards training new pilots. And so because of that one aspect, we'll give the Sportcruiser a slight edge because you can use it for multiple missions, which includes training students. Next, let's look at the designs of these airplanes. Both the Bristell and the Sportcruiser are low-wing airplanes. As a matter of fact, if you were to put them side by side, to the average eye you may not be able to tell the difference, but you look closer and you start picking things apart. One thing that stands out to me with the Bristell is the curvature of the nose. And if you go all around the airplane, you can see the attention that's paid to detail here. And same with the Sportcruiser. Honestly, these are both beautiful airplanes that's gonna grab anybody's attention wherever you fly it. Now, if you get inside of either of the airplanes, you see some slight differences. For one, the Bristell does have a wider cabin, but also if you look at the avionics in your panel, you have different instruments and switches on that panel. For me personally, I do like the look of the Bristell a little bit better. Take for example ergonomics. Once you get into the interior of any of these airplanes, generally speaking your controls and your powers are in the same location, but when you sit for a long period of time, or perhaps you go for a flight, you start to see some of the differences with these airplanes. Now, I've spent at least half an hour in both the Sportcruiser and the Bristell. And one thing that stands out to me with the Bristell, one, is the sitting position. I've mentioned that in my past video. But also the stick. When you hold the stick of the Bristell, it feels more sturdy. But also the feel and finish. It's one thing to look at an airplane and think of it as a nice looking airplane, but even more important is how the airplane makes you feel. Now, flying the Sportcruiser, I had a blast. That airplane flies amazing even in rough weather. But then jumping into a Bristell, one of the first things I noticed is, again, the sitting position, but also the feel of the stick. The Bristell feels a little bit more sturdy and well built once you start flying it. So because of that, we'll give the Bristell the slight edge when it comes to design. Comfort. Here's another thing to consider when looking at airplanes, especially if you're thinking about taking these airplanes on longer flights. Now, having flown both the Bristell and the Sportcruiser, I can tell you that they're equally as comfortable in the interior. Let's take the Sportcruiser for example. Generally speaking, the early models of the Sportcruiser are not as attractive on the inside. Again, being that a lot of Sportcruiser models were built as trainers, so perhaps they didn't think about making the interior nice and beefy. But when you look at the newest models of the Sportcruiser, even the entry levels, these are completely all leather interior, very comfortable seats, and you also have leather paddings on the side. Almost every surface that you touch in the entry level of the Sportcruiser is all soft touches. And then if you decide to go for the more premium models, you get even more beefier seats, much more lush and comfortable and nice and luxurious in there. Same thing with the Bristell. You take any of the newest model of the Bristell and you find that interior so attractive. All leather seatings, all leather patterns, and the Bristell also has a nice wide cabin compared to even the Cirrus. In the Bristell, the cabin width is about 50 inches. In the Sportcruiser, you also have a nice wide cabin at 46 inches. If you were to go on a long cross country with any of these airplanes, I promise you will not have any problems with the comfort level in there. So with that, we'll give them a draw. Performance: how fast can they fly? How well do they climb? And what is the fuel consumption? Now, being that both these airplanes are light sport aircraft, you're already working with some limitations. You're limited in your gross weight, you're limited with your power plant, and you're limited with how fast you can go in any of these airplanes. But if we take the actual components and the numbers, they're very comparable. Both the Bristell and the Sportcruiser uses Rotax engines, more particularly the Rotax 912 100 horsepower engine. We've already mentioned the range: 600 miles in the Sportcruiser, 800 miles in the Bristell. How fast they go: both these airplanes will travel anywhere from 100 to about 130 miles per hour, and both would burn roughly 4 to 5 gallons of fuel. Now, if you wanted more performance in your climb rate, you can always go for a better option in the Rotax 914, and I believe the Sportcruiser and the Bristell offer this option. But even better in a Bristell is that you can opt for a Rotax 915 engine, and this will make this airplane fly like a rocket. As a matter of fact, Bristell is one of the first manufacturers to test the new Rotax 915 engine in their airplanes, and the numbers are amazing. Over 2,000 feet a minute in your climb rate, and you should expect cruise speeds north of 150 knots. That's equivalent to about 170 miles per hour. Now, if you were to opt for the more powerful Rotax 915 engine, this automatically takes you out of the light sport category. You would be in the experimental category at this point. But because the Bristell currently offers this option, we're going to give it the slight edge. This is not to say that the Sportcruiser won't also offer this option at some point. Safety: how safe is it to fly any of these airplanes? It's much easier to compare apple for apple. Check the safety record and the accident rates between the Bristell and the Sportcruiser. But because there are a lot more Sportcruiser flying today than there are Bristells, this would be an unfair comparison. Having flown both the Bristell and the Sportcruiser, I would say the airplanes are just as safe as the pilot. These are both beautifully designed airplanes, and they are very sporty. As long as you don't get carried away, you should be fine flying a Sportcruiser or flying a Bristell. Price: how much do they cost? A base price Sportcruiser will cost you around $144,000. Now, keep in mind that a base model is not just a blank slate. With a base model, you're getting all leather seating, leather padding, and you're getting one glass panel with all standard features included. You're basically getting a complete airplane with almost all the options for $144,000. Now, a base model Bristell will cost you around $160,000. And similar to the Sportcruiser, a base model Bristell also comes with leather seating, and you're also getting one glass panel with the Garmin G3X Touch. Now, that's another thing I should point out. With the Sportcruiser, you have a different panel than what you get in the Bristell. The Sportcruiser generally uses a Dynon avionics, and a Bristell uses a Garmin avionics, and there's a price difference in these panels. If you were to go full blown and you want a fully loaded Bristell, you'd be looking at north of $200,000. A fully loaded Sportcruiser, closer to $190,000. Maybe it doesn't matter much to people who can actually afford any of these airplanes, but the more affordable option is the Sportcruiser. You're getting roughly the same performance, same comfort, same safety record, and same power plant for up to $20,000 less. And so with that, we're going to give the Sportcruiser the edge when it comes to the pricing. And that is it for this comparison video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up. And if this is your first time, be sure to hit that subscribe button for me. Again, this is Mike. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video.